So today we're looking at another Invicta video, and this one's about the Macedonian silver shields, which are pretty awesome. Well, at least until the end. But essentially, I think they were they went through several generations. They fought under Philip, they fought under Alexander, and they fought in the First Diadochi Wars. By that point, they were like old men, like in their 60s and whatnot, but could still kick people's butts. So they were probably some of the coolest and toughest old dudes in the world by the First Diadochi Wars, man. And yeah, they were known for their silver shield, and the unit still actually continued to exist under the Seleucid Empire, I believe. They had their own unit called the Silver Shield, but I think this one we're going to talk about the OG Silver Shields, that fought with Philip and Alexander and the First Diadochi Wars. And yeah, they were pretty cool until the First Diadochi Wars, in which they basically become the prototype of the Praetorian Guards and start killing everyone they work for. Like, they were only ever fully loyal to Alexander and Philip, but after that, they were like, well, I think the worst part is when they killed Eumenes, who I was actually really rooting for. I really liked Eumenes in the Diadochi Wars. Like, the dude's just a random secretary and ends up getting W's over Antigonus and becoming a rival to one of the most seasoned generals of the Macedonians. So again, and he got essentially betrayed by the Silver Shield and just got taken captive. So I was pretty upset about that. And yeah, but either way, I'm really looking forward to kind of having a more in-depth look, because they did appear in the Kings and Generals Diadochi Wars and Alexander's Conquest series, but I guess this will be a deeper look into them. And again, I'm kind of a little bit high on Invicta right now. I'm after the Sicilian Wars and then that War Elephant, I'm actually really, really high on Invicta at the minute. So, yeah, we should probably get to it, huh? So without any further ado, let's look at Units of History, the Macedonian Silver Shield by Invicta.
Alexander the Great is rightfully famous for his legendary campaigns across the ancient world. For 13 years, the Macedonian king fought battle after battle that would see him lead an army to the ends of the earth. Yet, we must acknowledge that those who marched by his side were also warriors of equal measure. But one unit in particular stands head and shoulders above the rest: the 3,000 Argi Raspides, the Silver Shields. After all, these elite veterans had been fighting since before Alexander was crowned, and would continue to do so long after he had died. Hailed as athletes of war with an unbroken chain of victories, they drove fear into the hearts of any enemy they faced. Today, let us dive into the incredible story of the most grizzled unit of history. We can trace the institutional origins of the Silver Shields back to the early days of Macedonian rule. It seems that in the 400s BC, the kingdom's army had undergone a series of reforms that included the formation of several elite units. These had always existed to some extent in the form of the inner circle of the heteroi, or those near the king, who formed the backbone of the monarch's political support and accompanied the ruler into battle. Scholars believe that Alexander I was the one who initially mounted these men into the first proto-units of the Hippos Heteroic, or companion cavalry.
Oh, wow.
It has also been speculated that he similarly established an elite unit known as the Pes Heteroi, or foot companions, who acted as infantry bodyguards in the royal court and on the battlefield. However, the details of this period are quite vague. Things only start to come into focus with the reign of Philip II of Macedon. Specifically, it would be his significant military reforms around the 360s BC that would more permanently establish the unit of foot companions. Ancient sources, like Demosthenes, attest to their existence in this period, while the historian Theopompus further specifies that they were a unit of bodyguards picked from among the largest and strongest of the Macedonians. Unfortunately, little else is stated explicitly about them, and we are left to guess many other details about their nature. What were their numbers? How were they equipped? How did they fight? In this regard, various historians have put their numbers at around 1 to 3,000. It's possible they were equipped in a similar fashion to the new Sarissaphoroi, but most believe they remained armed as the more traditional and flexible hoplites. Their training would have been consistent with general drill practice employed by Philip with a strict approach to discipline. In battle, it seems that they held the right flank alongside the cavalry, as is mentioned at the Battle of Aragon Valley against the Illyrians.
I always heard that the right was the position of honor. I'm not sure if that applies to this period. I kind of forgot, but I think in some videos we've seen, they've often mentioned that holding the right is a more prestigious position, a position of honor. Even Alexander and his companions were often cited as being in the right. So, yeah, that would make sense if that logic reigns true. But I also had heard that I thought they were portrayed more as hoplites, like in the Alexander's Conquest series, aside from the main failing Sarissa, because that would make more sense due to their flexibility and maneuverability compared to the failings, the main body failings, which was, noted to not have that as much,
When Philip was assassinated and Alexander became king, the army would see further modification as it geared up to re-subdue the Hellenic world before turning against the great enemy to the east. One of these changes seems to have been bestowing the title of Pesheteroi, or foot companions, to the entire 6-unit block of the Macedonian levy pikemen. Meanwhile, the elite force, which had previously held this title, became known as the Hypaspestai, or shield bearers. It's not exactly clear what spurred this change. Perhaps there was some propaganda or prestige value associated with the move, but I wouldn't read too far into this, as the difference may just as easily be a matter of notational idiosyncrasies between our limited sources who were writing from different time periods. Whatever the case, this elite force of Hypaspists would now be reorganized to meet the needs of Alexander's ambitious campaigns. At the lowest level, this meant forming a file of 16 men into a lokos, which was commanded by a lokargos. In turn, 16 of these formed a syntagmata of 256 men, while 2 of these formed a pentakosiarch of around 500 men, commanded by a pentakosiarchy. Early on, this was their basic unit structure, which would have had a few extra officers, standard bearers, and musicians attached to give them functionality in battle. Eventually, though, the Hypaspists would be grouped into larger 1,000-men chiliarchies under the command of a chiliarch. 3 of these would then form a 3,000-man regiment under the command of an archyhypaspist. It is speculated that much of Philip's old bodyguard of soldiers and officers would have formed the core of this group. Any holes in their ranks would have been filled with transfers or new recruits who went through the careful selection process we previously mentioned. Perhaps, though, there was some bias towards allowing politically well-connected nobles to join. In terms of their equipment, each soldier would be quite heavily armed. For defense, they wore the standard linothorax or bronze cuirass, turgis skirt, and greaves when the situation called for it. The head was protected by a Phrygian helmet with cheek pieces and a tapering crest that cushioned or deflected blows from above. But most important of all would be their large hoplon shield that made up the bulk of their protection. For offense, they used the dory hoplite spear and the xiphos sword. The make of all this gear would likely have been of quite superior quality, given the prestigious and elite nature of the Hypaspists. Thus,
I really like that helm. I've seen it before, like, to depict some Macedonian soldiers, like, basically the beard, it could go into a beard, symbol thing. I don't know, I think it's just a unique helmet. Man, I'm telling you, back then we had drip. Nowadays it's just kind of like camo and, like, the, you know, the more bucketish helm in Modern War. But back then, man, soldiers just had much better drip. Like, they just looked cooler, you know? And I understand the need for practicality and functionality. It's not a fashion show. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of like why I like older eras of war, because just the way soldiers would kind of, like, look, just looks so cool to me, you know what I mean?
Prestigious and elite nature of the Hypaspists. Thus, organized and equipped, they made ready for war. The reformed Hypaspists were first-blooded in the Thracian campaign of 335 BC, before being readied for the invasion of the Achaemenid Empire. When Alexander crossed the Hellespont in 334 BC, he would do so with 3,000 Hypaspists, 1,000 of which were known as the Hypaspistae Basilikoi, or the Royal Hypaspists. Leading them as Archihypaspises would be Nicanor, son of Parmenion. Over the following years, the Hypaspists would prove to be an invaluable asset which could fill a multitude of roles. For instance, in the pitched battles of the river Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, they acted as a key point of articulation between the infantry and cavalry on the right flank. When the situation demanded, they could fight as a regular phalanx, be dispersed among the horses in the manner of hemipoi, advance quickly across broken terrain as a flanking force, or be broken out into agile detachments.
Yeah, again, the flexibility and maneuverability of them is why you see they're probably not a part of the main-bodied phalanx. And also, I forgot, it was in the siege, when Alexander first arrived into Anatolia, and it was against a siege against Memnon. I forgot the specific city, but the battle had almost been lost until these guys showed up last minute to rescue the entire army. So that I remember that event. It's kind of a big example of their, like, maneuverability, you know?
For special missions. In siege battles too, they proved quite adept at storming operations and featured prominently in the taking of major cities alongside their king. The histories are studded with anecdotes of their heroic actions, which at times would cost them dearly. The commander Admetus would have his skull split by an axe while assaulting Tyre, while the officers Timander and Ardius would be felled in the siege of Halicarnassus. The Hypaspists also served an important role outside of battle.
This may be the last ad you ever see.
For example, they were often stationed within the king's palace or place of residence to provide security, while the royal Hypaspists guarded the inner sanctum of the king's chambers. Further beyond this, they could act as a police force. Having such a loyal source of trusted manpower would prove key on several occasions when Alexander wished to move around treasure, send top-secret letters, investigate plots, and apprehend mutineers. By the time the Macedonians made it to Mesopotamia, it appears that the original 3,000 Hypaspists had suffered some attrition. Its ranks were replenished by new recruits, while Alexander also held special competitions to choose new commanders. Details are fleeting, but it seems that 6 new Pentacosiarchs were now chosen, along with 3 new Chiliarchs, Atarius, Antigenes, and Philotas the Augean. Thus reformed, they would accompany Alexander in his rapid pursuit of Darius and later Bessus to the east. However, it's during this chase that their commander, Nicanor, son of Parmenion, would die of illness. He would be replaced as Archihypaspises by Neoptolemus. This new commander had noble roots, had served in the royal guards, and was known to be of fierce character, being distinguished as the first to scale the walls in the siege of Gaza. It was men of this temperament that would suit the Macedonian army well as it continued its campaigns into a new theatre of war in the Far East. Over the following years, Alexander's army would march across the satrapies of Aria, Drangiana, Arachosia, Gandhara, Bactria, and Sogdiana. Here, the Hypaspists were used extensively in numerous sieges, pitched battles, ambushes, and special missions necessary to tame the region. Next, they would join Alexander on his campaigns into India. It is at this point that we finally see the emergence of the unit known as the Silver Shields. The ancient Roman historian Curtius Rufus states that on the eve of the Indian expedition, Alexander added silver plating to his soldiers' shields, gave their horses golden bits, and ornamented their cuirasses with either gold or silver, because he had heard of the splendid arms found among the Indians. However, it's important to note that we have other sources with conflicting stories. For instance, Diodorus Siculus anachronistically refers to the Hypaspists at Gaugamela as the Argyraspides, while Justin erroneously says that the whole Macedonian army was given silver gear and called the Argyraspides. Another clue.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's the thing with all these historians writing centuries removed, right? Or like decades. Yeah, things like this might get conflicted.
Is that we are told by two sources that after the army mutinied at the Hephaestus River and returned to the Hydaspes River, they received a fresh shipment of armor from the west. Perhaps this was when the Argyraspides got their famed silver shields. Clearly there are...
That's interesting that we don't know the specific moment they become that. I mean, they obviously exist as a unit already, but this is like their main identity, which they're known by the Silver Shield. That's interesting that there's so many conflicting reports and mystery, I guess, about like when is the exact moment they get this. That's interesting.
Many interpretations to be had here, but it seems scholars do tend to favor the idea that the Argyraspides were an evolution of Alexander's veteran Hypaspists, who upgraded their gear at some point during the Indian campaigns between 327 and 325 BC. Following the eventual conclusion of the expedition, the entire army would return to the west. Alexander and the fleet did so along the Gedrosian Desert, while another contingent marched inland through the Mulla Pass, up to Drangiana and back to Mesopotamia. Scholars reconstructing these events seem to think that the veteran Argyraspides took the northern route with Craterus, while the mention of other Hypaspists with Alexander was some splinter group or newly formed set of units. Whatever the case, the army would eventually regroup after much hardship in Babylon. At this point, they were left to watch as their king increasingly took on Eastern trappings and implemented a series of reforms which left them feeling alienated. This eventually came to a head in the autumn of 324 BC with the mutiny at Opis. Alexander finally managed to arrange a peaceful settlement, which involved the dismissal of many European forces, including the veteran Argyraspides. These now set off with Craterus on a long journey home. They would be waylaid in Cilicia for a time as the Macedonians sought to settle affairs in the region. But just as they seemed ready to continue, terrible news stopped them in their tracks. Alexander was dead. News shocked the empire and set off a chain reaction of events. In the east, Alexander's generals were mired in heated debate about the future of the empire, while in the west, a coalition of Greek cities rose up in revolt. Craterus was torn on which side of the world to involve himself. Ultimately, his allies would secure his political future in the east, while he set off for the west. He would leave behind the Silver Shields, to guard the treasures that had been stockpiled in Cilicia, and later to protect Philotas, who had been assigned as the region's satrap. From this position, they would find themselves caught between the gears of war put in motion by Alexander's ambitious successors. The First War of the Diadochi around 320 BC, for example, saw a
Yeah, I had forgotten that Alexander dismissed them. I felt that kind of surprised me because I thought he would like keep these guys around because they seem like the elite, right? But then again, with the mutinies and whatnot, and a lot of the Macedonians just wanting to go home, he's probably like, okay, just get rid of them, like, get rid of these headaches or whatnot. It was like Alexander, I had heard before he died, was starting to implement more Persian soldiers, and he was kind of starting to, I think he even wanted to start using war elephants, but he never got the chance to. So he was definitely, like, absorbing the more, Asian eastward things, and, yeah. I kind of do wish we could have gotten, like, a kind of look into like an alternate history of how far Alexander would have gone and how the rest of his reign would have gone. I don't know, that just seems like something that seems like interesting. It's one of those big what ifs, right, in history. Well, what if Alexander had lived longer? But oh well. And yeah, these guys are just chilling here, and I think it's Perdiccas, who hires them when they go to attack Ptolemy, and then that's where they begin their streak of betrayal by killing Perdiccas, I believe.
Coalition of Western forces, namely Antipater, Craterus, Antigonus, and Ptolemy, band together to take on Perdiccas, who acted as an effective regent. In this war, Perdiccas sent Eumenes with an army north to confront the rebels in Anatolia, while he himself led an army to invade Egypt, picking up the silver shields along the way. While Eumenes proved victorious, Perdiccas poorly managed his campaign, which struggled to penetrate the Nile Delta and saw heavy attrition in botched sieges and river crossings. This led his officers to turn on him. A plot was hatched, and at night, a cabal, which included Antigenes, commander of the Silver Shields, murdered Perdiccas. In the aftermath, the murderers would negotiate a peace with Ptolemy, and a new balance of power was agreed upon between the successors of the partition of Triparadissus. In these matters, the Silver Shields, and especially their commanders, would be courted by various factions who saw them as a valuable pawn to control on the chessboard of the empire. However, they were increasingly adopting an independent mind of their own.
Again, you have to think, like, they were, like, loyal for the most part to, Alexander and whatnot, but with Alexander gone, it's just like, I guess we're just here now, and and they know they're awesome for their famed reputation, so it's like everyone's now trying to, like, get them on their side, so that kind of does bring in a new level of prestige and even kind of authority to themselves, right? To thinking like, wait a minute, like they need us, and then that kind of brings in, especially the murder of Perdiccas. It's like, we can do what we want for ourselves now. Like you kind of just see this evolution of why they would think that, and yeah, they eventually just go on full and they're in for themselves now. Just like everyone else, as soon as Alexander died,
For the time being, they followed their commander Antigenes, who had been made satrap of Susiana, and helped him escort the treasures from the old Persian capital back to their previous base in Cilicia. By now, many were in their 50s or 60s, having seen decades of conflict. Perhaps they thought they might finally collect their well-deserved spoils and return home as rich men. However, their dreams of retirement would be cut short with the outbreak of the Second War of the Diadochi in 318 BC. Once again, many factions would attempt to win their support. Ultimately, they backed Eumenes, who acted on behalf of the regent Polyperchon, and who apparently had the backing of the Argead house, with Alexander's own mother writing to argue his case. Thus, the Argyraspides found themselves in the service of another general waging war across the empire. This time, though, they were sure to draw pay from the treasures they had been guarding, and accumulated quite the impressive baggage train of goods and followers, which included their wives and children. Eventually, Eumenes would take them east to draw from the recruiting ground of the satrapies of the east, before turning about to face the pursuing forces of Antigonus. The two would fight in 317 BC at the Battle of Paritarchine. Here, Antigonus deployed around 30,000 heavy infantry, 6,000 light infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 65 elephants in an oblique order, with the left anchored on a hill. Eumenes, meanwhile, had fewer heavy troops overall, but with more light infantry and nearly double the elephants. The senior Argyraspides would be deployed on the right wing of the main phalanx, but would relinquish their old position on the extreme right to the younger regiments of the Hypaspists. It's possible that this role reversal meant taking up the Sarissa rather than the Hoplon, but the evidence for this is not clear. Either way, they would be matched up against the Greek mercenaries, who were sure to be quaking in their boots at the sight of the infamous shining silver shields before them.
Honestly, just that visual, right, would probably inspire fear, especially these guys who basically have seen like decades of war. These are some of the oldest, toughest grandpas of the time, right? And like the thing is, especially with like phalanx or like hoplite, like kind of combat, it's not so much about like, I mean, yeah, personal strength is a part of it, but it's more about like discipline and cohesion, right? And like these guys just have it and have mastered it. Despite their age, they can still like basically wreck the best of them. And yeah, like I don't blame the Greek mercenaries for being like, holy crap, like we don't want to fight these guys, you know?
Battle began as one of Antigonus's cavalry officers launched a preemptive charge which was rebuffed and led to the advance of the main body of Eumenes. These troops, and especially the silver shields, proved superior to their counterparts, pushing through the ranks of skirmishers, elephants, and phalangites that got in their way. The impetus of their attack dealt punishing damage that very nearly led to victory. However, their push opened a gap of the left flank, which was exploited by the cavalry of Antigonus that now threatened their rear. This forced them to halt and draw back to protect the baggage train. Thus, while Antigonus suffered roughly 5 times as many casualties, he was able to turn the battle into a tentative draw and mutual retreat.
Again, the Antigonus and Eumenes rivalry is so underrated. Like, I just love that when Eumenes betrayed him, Antigonus dropped everything just to chase him all the way here. He's like, I'm not letting you get away. But yeah, like I'm telling you, Eumenes just, you know, he wasn't, at least before Alexander's death, he was Alexander's secretary, I believe. Meanwhile, Antigonus was a battle-hardened general, and yet Eumenes proved to have great talent on his side. As he was able to trade blows with Antigonus. Though at this point, yeah, he does have the great quality of the silver shields for sure, but like that's still, I don't want to take away from Eumenes. I think the guy was talented, and if kept around longer, he could have been the great like Diadochi player. But unfortunately, he doesn't last that long, which is sad because I was actually kind of rooting for the guy.
The two rivals would soon clash again at the Battle of Gabiene in 316 BC. Both forces deployed a massive corps of heavy infantry in the center, with additional light troops, cavalry, and elephants. Antigonus chose to refuse the center while concentrating mobile forces on his right to overwhelm the enemy. Eumenes, in response, prepared to parry this thrust. Meanwhile, the senior Argyraspides would be deployed in the center. To this end, we are told that Antigenes, leader of the Silver Shields, sent a rider to berate the Macedonians in the enemy's front lines, saying, "Wicked men, are you sinning against your fathers,
Dang it.
who conquered the whole world under Philip and Alexander? Shortly, you will see what the Argyraspides can achieve."
Holy crap, that's an awesome boast. That's a flex right there. And completely valid. Holy crap, this is hype. I wish I could have re-seen the Diadochi Wars. Again, that was probably like my favorite era of history was definitely Alexander to the Diadochi Wars, so yeah. I wish I could have enjoyed it more. By the end, I was, this year I've mainly just been trying to upload every day, so I kind of have like, I gotta keep going, so I feel like I haven't had the full opportunity to fully enjoy a series, before I'm thinking, okay, what's the next video to jump to, but I kind of wish I had enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, just I didn't have time to marinate with it, before we needed to keep moving and keep going. So that's probably my greatest regret, but either way, yeah.
Apparently, this shook the Antigonid phalanx, while the ranks of Eumenes swelled with pride. Battle trumpets were sounded, and the ranks of both sides clashed. First came a massed skirmisher and elephant duel along the front. Their wheeling bouts churned up massive amounts of dust, which obscured much of the battlefield. This was exploited by Antigonus, who managed to slip his cavalry around the flanks of Eumenes, forcing back his cavalry and capturing his baggage train. However, he could do little to hold back the inexorable tide of the vaunted Silver Shields in the center. These men, most in their 60s and 70s, who were old enough to be grandparents of their foes, reportedly won a great victory, slaying 5,000 of the enemy without a single loss.
I'm telling you, these guys were pretty awesome. Again, I'm not happy with them near the end, because I kind of compared them to the Praetorian Guards in terms of just their willingness to betray who they were working for. I mean, granted, this time's a little bit more justified, because Antigonus has their baggage train and their family, so it's kind of hard to be fully angry, but still, they still, I feel like, by the end, destroyed their own greatness by showing that they're willing to betray those they work for, But, they're still awesome, though. I'm telling you, these some of the toughest grandpas you'll ever see, dude. And it kind of goes to show you the difference between, I guess, how in Phalanx and, Hoplite thing, it's more about, discipline and cohesion, I feel. Granted, obviously, strength is a thing, but, enough that these old dudes can fight. And, they've been marching throughout the world their entire lives, so, they're just, probably in just phenomenal shape still, despite their age,
Yet, stripped of cavalry support, they were left vulnerable. The Antigonid cavalry now collapsed upon them from the rear, but the extreme skill of the Silver Shields meant they were able to redeploy quickly into a box formation and extricate themselves from the situation.
Again, just the quality of them, right? They've been fighting since Philip's time, so they know what the heck they're doing. Goes to show you just their skill and experience on display in this battle.
As the dust settled, they saw that they were unquestioned masters of the field, but had lost their baggage train with decades worth of accumulated loot and family to the enemy. Thus, when Eumenes attempted to rally them for renewed battle the next day, they showed uncharacteristic hesitation. They had been hit exactly in their Achilles heel. What good was any of this fighting if at the end of the day, everything they had battled for might be lost?
Again, Antigonus struck a psychological blow. The greatest morale blow probably we've seen yet. Just managing to completely destroy their fighting spirit. That was a great move on Antigonus's part, taking the baggage train.
among them now sought more assured means to see their valuables returned. Their leader, Antigenes, reportedly remained loyal to his master, but other officers and veterans opened secret negotiations with the enemy. The plot eventually led to an agreement that they would capture and hand over Eumenes in exchange for clemency and a return of their families. As the betrayal was carried out, Eumenes lay a curse upon them. "You accursed scoundrels! May the gods who punish perjury take note of your conduct and bring you to the end you yourselves have given your leaders. Yes, it was you who a short time ago bespattered yourselves with the blood of Perdiccas and also devised the same fate for Antipater. You would have killed Alexander himself had heaven willed that he could die at a mortal's hand."
Holy crap. Bars. But, completely justified. Eumenes. I'm saying, I think their betrayal kind of destroyed a bit of their greatness and their great reputation, you know? And also I'm just a fanboy of Eumenes, so his death kind of soured the Silver Shield in my eyes too.
"You did your worst and bedeviled him with mutinies. Now I am the last victim of your treachery, and I call down on you this infernal curse. May you spend all eternity exiled to this camp, poverty-stricken and homeless, and may you be destroyed by your own weapons, with which you have more often destroyed generals of your own side than those of your enemies."
Dang. Scathing. Bars. Period. Eumenes, man, like, completely justified, but man, what a scathing rebuke.
This apocryphal tale would be a harbinger of their eventual fate. In the aftermath of battle, Antigonus would have Eumenes executed and the commander Antigenes burned alive for having resisted turning his commander over. As for the veteran Silver Shields, they would be seen as too much of a threat to be kept near the heartland of the empire. 2,000 of them would be distributed among the garrisons, while 1,000 of their surviving members were dispatched to the remote satrapies of the east. According to our sources, instructions were given that they be destroyed by sending them on difficult missions from which they were meant never to return. Such was the terrible fate of one of the most veteran units of antiquity, which...
Yeah, kind of like, essentially Antigonus killed them in a way, but like indirectly dismantled and killed them. And to be fair, yeah, he's like, man, these guys have betrayed several people, I can't keep them around, so... Again, they kind of went out, like, with more of a whimper, I feel, than a blaze of glory. I mean, granted, they were doing missions and stuff, but I don't know.
had won an almost unbroken string of victories over the course of 4 decades, only to be cast aside, empty-handed, in ignominious exile. We hope you've appreciated this deep dive into...
Yeah, I love that. That was a great one. I'm pretty high on Invicta right now, so, yeah, overall, I have to say, just, another great video, and, I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow when we start something else.